They lived among us for decades, and no one ever knew. Not as soldiers, not as diplomats, not as spies hiding in alleyways, but as neighbors. They mowed their lawns. They waved at the mailman. They hosted weekend barbecues where everyone thought they were just another American family. But behind those front doors, behind the smiles, behind the perfectly ordinary lives, they were something else entirely. They were the KGB's most elite operatives, illegals, deep cover agents trained to become ghosts inside the United States. No diplomatic immunity, no embassy protection, no extraction plan if they were caught. Just a mission: disappear into American life so completely that even the FBI couldn't find you. And for years, it worked. Some of them lived under false identities for so long that they forgot the sound of their real names. Some married Americans who never learned the truth. Some raised children, American children, who had no idea their parents were working for Moscow. These weren't movie spies. They weren't James Bond. They were accountants, engineers, real estate agents, stay-at-home parents, people you'd never look at twice. But inside their homes were encrypted radios hidden behind walls, coded notebooks disguised as grocery lists, microdots containing classified information, dead drops tucked into hollowed-out rocks in public parks. They lived double lives so flawlessly that even their closest friends never suspected a thing. The FBI called them ghosts. The KGB called them illegals. And the world didn't know they existed until one summer morning in 2010, when the United States quietly arrested 10 deep-cover Russian agents living ordinary American lives. But that wasn't the beginning of the story. The Illegals Program began decades earlier, in the darkest years of the Cold War, when the KGB realized something terrifying. To beat the United States, you had to become the United States, to infiltrate it from the inside, to plant agents so deeply into American society that they could influence policy, gather intelligence, and shape the future without ever being detected. This wasn't espionage. It was identity theft on a national scale. And the most disturbing part? Some of these agents were never caught. Some vanished when the network collapsed. Some returned to Russia quietly. Some stayed in the West under new identities. And some may still be here, living normal lives, raising families, blending into the background, waiting. This is the story of the KGB Illegals Program, the Cold War operation that blurred the line between truth and deception, loyalty and betrayal, identity and illusion. And once you understand how it worked, you'll never look at your neighbors the same way again. The Illegals Program didn't begin with the agents who lived in American suburbs. It began decades earlier, inside the walls of the KGB's most secret directorates, at a time when the Cold War was young, unstable, and dangerously unpredictable. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Soviet Union faced a problem it couldn't solve with tanks or missiles. The United States had emerged from World War II with a booming economy, a global network of allies, and, most importantly, nuclear weapons. The Kremlin needed information, real information, not propaganda, not rumors, not intercepted radio chatter. They needed eyes and ears inside the United States itself. But there was a flaw in their existing spy network. Most Soviet intelligence officers worked out of embassies or consulates. They had diplomatic cover, but that also meant they were watched constantly. The FBI knew their names, their faces, their routines. Every move they made was monitored. The KGB realized something simple and terrifying. If you wanted to spy on America, you couldn't look like a spy. You had to look like an American. So the KGB created a new kind of operative, one who wouldn't rely on embassy protection, diplomatic immunity, or official channels. These agents would enter Western countries under false identities, build entire lives from scratch, and blend into society so completely that no one would ever question who they were. They called them illegals. Unlike traditional spies, illegals didn't walk into government buildings with forged badges. They didn't sneak into military bases at night. Their mission was far more subtle and far more dangerous. They were sent to live ordinary lives, to get jobs, to make friends, to join community groups, to raise families, to become part of the fabric of American society? Because the KGB understood something the FBI didn't. At least not yet. The most powerful intelligence isn't stolen from safes or intercepted from encrypted lines. It's gathered quietly, patiently, through relationships, conversations, and trust. An illegal could spend years cultivating a single contact, a neighbor, a coworker, a local official, someone who might one day reveal something important without ever realizing it. But to do that, the agents needed more than forged documents. They needed entire identities, legends, as the KGB called them, built with painstaking detail. A legend wasn't just a fake name, it was a birthplace, a childhood, a school history, a work record, a family background, a personality. Every detail had to be believable. Every memory had to be rehearsed. Every lie had to be lived as if it were the truth. The KGB spent years constructing these identities. They stole the names of real people who had died young. They forged birth certificates, baptism records, and school transcripts. They created entire life stories for agents who hadn't even left training yet. And then came the hardest part, teaching these operatives to think, speak, and behave like Westerners. They studied American slang, American humor, American mannerisms. They practiced ordering food in restaurants. They learned how to argue about baseball scores. They memorized the layout of American grocery stores. Because one wrong phrase, one outdated reference, one cultural slip could expose everything. By the mid-1950s, the KGB had built a pipeline of deep cover operatives ready to be deployed into the West. Some were sent to Europe, some to Canada, some directly into the United States. They carried no weapons, no gadgets, no cyanide pills, just a new name, a new life, and a mission that could last decades. The Illegals Program had begun, and the United States had no idea it was happening. Before an illegal ever set foot in the United States, they had to stop being who they were. Not just on paper, not just in appearance, but in their mind. The KGB didn't train these operatives the way they trained ordinary intelligence officers. This wasn't about learning codes or surveillance techniques. This was about erasing a life and building a new one from the ground up. Training began in secluded facilities outside Moscow, places with no signs, no markings, and no official existence. Recruits arrived under cover of night, often blindfolded, escorted through gates they would never see again. Once inside, they were cut off from the outside world. No newspapers, no radio, no contact with family. The first step was identity stripping. Agents were told to forget their real names, their real birthdays, their real childhoods. Those details were now liabilities, memories that could betray them, attachments that could get them killed. In their place, the KGB issued a new identity, a legend. A legend wasn't just a fake passport. It was a life story with depth, texture, and history. A birthplace, a childhood neighborhood, a list of schools attended, a timeline of jobs held, a family background that could withstand questioning. Every detail had to be memorized until it felt real. Agents practiced answering questions about their fake childhoods as if they had lived them. They rehearsed stories about imaginary friends, old teachers, and family holidays that never happened. They studied the geography of towns they had never visited, learning street names, landmarks, and local slang. Because if an FBI agent ever asked, "Where did you go to school?" the answer had to come instantly, naturally, without hesitation. Language training was relentless. Illegals didn't just learn English, they learned accents, regional dialects, speech patterns. They practiced ordering food in diners. They learned how Americans argued, how they joked, how they interrupted each other. They studied sitcoms, radio shows, and newspapers to absorb the rhythm of everyday conversation. The KGB even brought in native English speakers to test them. If an agent slipped, even once, they were sent back for more training. Some never made it out. Then came the behavioral conditioning. Agents learned how to shop like Americans, how to stand in line, how to make small talk with strangers, how to complain about the weather, how to blend into a crowd without looking like they were trying to blend in. They practiced living in apartments designed to mimic American homes. They learned how to use Western appliances, Western currency, Western etiquette. They were taught how to dress, how to gesture, how to smile for photographs. Because the smallest detail, a gesture, a habit, a cultural misstep, could expose them. But the hardest part wasn't the language or the mannerisms. It was the psychological transformation. Illegals had to learn to live without support, without backup, without the safety net embassy officers relied on. If they were caught, Moscow would deny knowing them. There would be no rescue mission, no prisoner exchange, no diplomatic pressure. They were alone, and they had to accept that before they ever left training. By the time an illegal completed the program, they weren't just fluent in English. They weren't just comfortable with American culture. They weren't just carrying a new identity. They had become that identity. The person they used to be, the one born in the Soviet Union, was gone, buried beneath layers of lies, rehearsed memories, and carefully constructed habits. Only then were they ready for the next step, insertion into the West. When an illegal finally left training, they didn't walk out the front gate and board a plane to New York. Their insertion into the West was a process so delicate, so carefully engineered, that even a single mistake could unravel years of preparation. The KGB didn't simply hand an agent a passport and wish them luck. They built a path, a trail of documents, travel records, and life events that made the agent's new identity look as real as anyone else's. The first step was establishing the legend abroad. Illegals rarely traveled directly from the Soviet Union to the United States. That would have been too obvious, too risky, too easy for Western intelligence to trace. Instead, they were routed through neutral countries, places where immigration systems were less strict, where forged documents could slip through unnoticed, where a new identity could take root without raising suspicion. Some agents spent months, even years, living in Europe under their new names before ever setting foot in America. They worked small jobs, rented apartments, opened bank accounts, paid taxes, built a paper trail that looked completely ordinary. Because when they finally applied for a visa to the United States, everything had to look legitimate. A clean background, a stable work history, a believable reason for immigrating. And once they arrived, the real work began. Illegals didn't land in America with secret missions waiting for them. They had to build their lives from scratch. Find a place to live, get a job, learn the rhythms of the neighborhood, blend into the community. Some settled in quiet suburbs, some in busy cities, some in small towns where no one questioned a newcomer. The KGB didn't dictate where they lived. They dictated how they lived. Stay invisible, stay ordinary, stay forgettable. An illegal's first priority was stability, a steady job, a predictable routine, a life that wouldn't attract attention. Some became engineers or technicians, fields where they could gather useful information without needing security clearances. Others worked in finance, real estate, or academia. Some ran small businesses. Some stayed home to raise children, which gave them access to community groups, school events, and social circles that embassy officers could never infiltrate. Every relationship mattered. Every conversation was a potential source of intelligence. Every neighbor was a possible connection to someone important. But insertion wasn't just about blending in. It was about communication. Illegals couldn't walk into a Soviet embassy. They couldn't call Moscow on the phone. They couldn't send letters home. They used coded radio bursts transmitted from hidden equipment inside their homes. They used invisible ink on postcards. They used dead drops in parks, forests, and public buildings. They used short, seemingly meaningless messages embedded in newspaper classifieds. And they never communicated more than necessary. The less Moscow Center knew about their daily lives, the safer everyone was. Some illegals lived in the United States for years before receiving their first real assignment. The KGB didn't rush them. They waited until the agent was fully integrated, until they had friends, routines, and a life that looked indistinguishable from anyone else's. Only then did the real mission begin. Gathering intelligence wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was as simple as attending a community meeting. Sometimes it was listening to coworkers talk about their jobs. Sometimes it was reading local newspapers and sending summaries back to Moscow. But occasionally, an illegal got close to something bigger. A defense contractor, a government employee, a scientist working on sensitive research. And when that happened, the KGB paid attention. Because an illegal wasn't just a spy, They were a long-term investment, a seed planted deep inside American soil, meant to grow quietly until the moment it was needed. Some waited decades for that moment. Some never received the assignment they trained for, and some got too close to the truth for the FBI to ignore. For decades, the Illegals Program wasn't just a theory. It wasn't just training manuals and forged passports. It was real people, living real lives, quietly shaping the world around them. Some of the most successful illegals didn't steal classified documents. They didn't break into government buildings. They didn't hack computers or intercept communications. They did something far more effective. They built relationships. One illegal, operating under the name Cynthia Murphy, lived in New Jersey and worked in finance. Her job gave her access to the personal accounts of wealthy political donors, people with influence, connections, and access to policymakers. She didn't need to steal anything. All she had to do was listen, observe, report patterns Moscow could use to understand how American politics really worked. Another pair, operating as Richard and Cynthia Murphy, no relation, infiltrated academic and political circles in New York. They attended fundraisers. They joined community boards. They built friendships with people who had no idea they were feeding information to the KGB. Their reports weren't dramatic, but they were valuable. Who was rising in local politics? Who had influence? Who might one day hold national office? Then there were the deep-cover couples who raised children born on American soil. The Vavilov brothers grew up believing they were Canadian. Their parents, both illegals, built a life so convincing that even their own sons didn't know the truth. Those boys went on to become scientists, their futures shaped by a lie that began in a KGB training facility decades earlier. And then there was Anna Chapman. Her mission wasn't to steal documents, it was to get close to people. People with access, people with influence, people who could open doors. She moved through social circles with ease, charming her way into rooms most spies could never enter. None of these operations involved dramatic heists or secret blueprints, but they gave Moscow something far more valuable: a map of American society, who mattered, who talked, who influenced decisions behind closed doors. The Illegals Program wasn't about stealing secrets. It was about understanding the country from the inside. And for a long time, it worked. For years, the FBI watched the Illegals Program from the shadows. They didn't know how many agents were inside the United States. They didn't know where they all lived. They didn't know what they were after. But they knew one thing: the network was real. It began with small clues: a suspicious money transfer, a coded radio burst intercepted by chance, a meeting in a park that didn't look like a meeting at all. Individually, none of it meant anything. Together, it formed a pattern. The FBI launched a quiet, years-long investigation. Agents followed suspects through crowded streets. They photographed handoffs that looked like nothing more than neighbors chatting. They recorded conversations that seemed harmless until they were analyzed line by line. They watched as the illegals lived their ordinary lives: school drop-offs, grocery runs, backyard barbecues, all while sending encrypted messages back to Moscow. The breakthrough came when the FBI cracked a series of coded communications. The messages revealed something alarming. The network was larger than anyone expected, and some of the operatives were getting dangerously close to people with real political influence. The Bureau knew they had to move. In the summer of 2010, after nearly a decade of surveillance, the FBI launched a coordinated operation across multiple states. Agents moved in quietly, arresting 10 deep-cover operatives in a sweep that stunned the world. Neighbors were shocked. Friends were confused. Co-workers refused to believe it. The people they thought they knew, the friendly couple next door, the quiet accountant, the woman who always volunteered at school events, were Russian intelligence officers. Within days, the United States and Russia negotiated a spy swap in Vienna. The arrested illegals were traded for 4 individuals held in Russian prisons. It was one of the largest exchanges since the Cold War. And just like that, the network vanished. Homes were emptied, bank accounts were frozen, lives built over decades were abandoned in a moment. But the most unsettling part wasn't the arrests, it was the unanswered questions. Because the FBI never found all of them. Some illegals disappeared before the operation began. Some were never identified. Some simply blended deeper into American life and never resurfaced. And today, years after the arrests, one truth remains. We still don't know how many are here, how many built new identities, how many raised families, how many are still living quiet, ordinary lives, waiting for a mission that may never come.